Hey everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and just so that we're kind of getting content on a regular basis, I thought I'd bring you guys a quick battle that I fought today, because none other than Turin, who is my opponent for this match, as I hopped into a quick battle while he was streaming, and just through the sheer luck of the draw, I knew he was streaming, but I didn't think he was searching for a battle at the time, so I ended up rolling him as my opponent. And he's actually been advising me to try and do more multiplayer stuff on a regular basis. You know, do more quick battles and stuff, just kind of on a daily basis to give you guys little things between those, you know, monolithic 2-3 hour videos I do. So let's go ahead and look at army comps, and we'll start with Turin. His front line here, he's got clan rats, 3 units of clan rats with shields, with a couple of extra chevrons, probably for bonus leadership. Then he's got 2 units of storm vermin with shields, 2 units of Skaven slave spears holding his back line just for some extra anti-large, 2 units of rat ogres, who are a really powerful unit nowadays, plague freeze on a plague furnace, which is always very popular, and he's very durable despite how easily he can get isolated. And then for his legendary lord, he's got none other than the free LC lord Tresh Craventail, who of course with that 70 melee defense is really tanky. And he's got all sorts of cool abilities to kind of help him out against the Lizardmen, especially that anti-large. Then, of course, he's got the double warp lightning cannon, which is a staple of Skaven players against the Lizardmen. And then finally, he's got 2 units of storm vermin with halberds that are guarding the back line. Oh, I can do cinematic view, fun. So, here I've got pterodons with fire leech bolas, who you can see. We've already lost a couple of them due to warp lightning, but once I noticed they were under attack, I started dodging a little more proactively, which if you fly them at the correct angle, you can kind of avoid some more damage, but we've already lost 1, taking quite a bit of damage. And then I've got, of course, a unit of chameleon skinks coming around the flank here that Turin hasn't spotted yet, whose goal is to try and help me take out these warp lightning cannons. For my army, I've got 2 stegodons with giant bows. One of them is a skink chief who has slippery, just because I know he's going to end up having to fight for me. And then the other one is, of course, a regular stegodon that I gave 2 extra chevrons to give him some bonus leadership, bonus melee defense. Those are the things I'm aiming for, but I believe it also increases his missile damage. Yes, it does. Then for my main line, I've got 2 units of skink cohorts, backed up by 3 units of Saurus warriors, and then a Slaanesh Mage Priest of Heavens, who has Banishment, Shield of the Old Ones, Aura of Quetzal, Blood Statue with a Spite, Chain Lightning, Comet, Curse of the Midnight Wind. So a pretty powerful spell loadout, almost all damage. I do have, of course, Curse of the Midnight Wind to help with some buffs. And then finally, I've got a Saurus Scarvet on a Cold One with the Potion of Strength and the leadership debuff ability, and then some Cold One Spear Riders with a single chevron, because I figured there were going to be rat ogres, because there always are. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We do a pretty nice little drop rocks here that did a good amount of damage, and we are getting some half-decent fire leech bolas, even against heavily armored units like storm vermin. These fire leech bolas can actually do a pretty good amount of damage. Like, despite the fact these guys are so heavily armored, when it does hit, which that was a pretty bad volley, but it can actually hurt quite badly. And here, the stegodons have already started firing in counter battery, and you can see they've already managed to destroy one of these warp lightning cannons. This is something I learned from Dov, I believe it was, who told me that if you counter battery, you can actually do really well with destroying these war machines early on, because warp lightning cannons actually don't trade good counter battery fire. Here, you can see in the meanwhile, the rat ogres have run ahead to go ahead and try and shut down one of my stegodons, but I did pop a overcast Curse of the Midnight Wind to reduce their melee attack to 8 and their armor to 0, so that he would do really well against them, and they of course wouldn't hurt him as bad. And now the lines are starting to meet. Because the rat ogres have already kind of come in here with everything they got, I decided to bring my Cold One Riders into the middle of the line, but they are going to end up going after this Plague Priest, because I know he's the scariest thing that I have to fight right now. So the Slan, I'm trying to get him close enough to throw down his various buffs, and you can see, thanks to the Skink Chief's shooting attacks, we've already destroyed and wounded this Warp Lightning Cannon to the point that it's basically gone. And these Chameleon Skinks are doing a nice job finishing it off. And look at this. These Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bolas single-handedly have taken this Warp Lightning Cannon down to half. So here we're going to drop a nice fat comet that's going to blow apart that Clan Rat unit. They do have Blessed with Filth being cast on them from this Plague Priest, which is giving poison to all of these guys. But overall, my line's holding up okay. He did summon a unit of Plague Monks here, but they're kind of having a hard time engaging. You see, most of them are just sort of standing around right now. I don't know if he just hadn't given them I think he just hadn't given them an attack order yet. I do have the Sword of Scarvet with all of his abilities pop, the Potion of Strength, Deadly Onslaught, and everything, trying to chase down this Plague Priest, but he just has so much mass, and he's just pushing through all of my stuff, no problem. In the back, my Pterodons are chasing off this Warp Lightning Cannon to try and shatter it, just like we shattered that one, to give us an early game advantage, just because that's like 2,000 or 2,200 points that have essentially been lost. My Chameleon Skinks here, of course, are running away from the Storm Vermin, who they were leading away for a bit, because these Storm Vermin are very expensive, and right now they're super far away from the fight, because I was able to use long-range artillery and fast things that the Storm Vermin just can't catch, like the Pterodons and the Chameleon Skinks, that essentially made it so that the Storm Vermin are basically going to be useless until later on in the fight. Now on these flanks, he's only got Clan Rats and Skaven slaves, so the Skink cohorts and Saurus are going to mop them up no problem. He does. I do, of course, throw down a banishment here, which is going to shatter one of these Clan Rat units, or Storm Vermin units, and once the Storm Vermin break, they start causing leadership problems for these other units, and these Skaven slaves and Clan Rats, with a Terror Causer in their midst, they just stand no chance of keeping their leadership together. My Cold One Riders eventually do break, just from taking a lot of damage. There's just a lot of Skaven in here. A lot of Clan Rats still. I do manage to throw down the Blood Statuette of Spite on these Plague Bunks, who are also degenerating, so that's just going to make them break down really fast. It's weird that it gets locked on the priest like that. He is throwing down, of course, he is getting a lot of damage from this Plague Priest, who we have managed to put quite a beating on, but he's still only at half health despite everything. Between the Skaven Slaves and Spears and the Rat Ogres keeping him in place, and now the Storm Vermin, of course, coming in, the Skink Chief is starting to take a bunch of damage. I do pop Cold-Blooded, but I pop Slippery as well to counteract the speed and melee defense debuff. And I call down another Comet, but he sees it and unfortunately starts getting out of the way. I don't think, yeah. So it does hit, barely does anything to the Rat Ogres, but it does completely screw the slaves, and they all start scattering. At this point, all my Skinks start running off, and in the main fight, I continue breaking his units, but because he has me so outnumbered, I don't really have anything to effectively pursue him to make sure they stay broken, because one thing Skaven do is they keep coming back. So the Salon is still floating around, providing leadership buff and various spells. The Scarvet is still trying to pursue the Plague Priest, but he's not quite fast enough. Like, he's faster than the Plague Priest, but his attack animations don't work as well while he's moving. So it's managing to stay away from me, and when it runs through friendly troops like that, I get caught up and he doesn't, because his mass just lets him push through. Of course, my Skinks are continuing to rally. We've shattered this unit of Skaven Slaves, this unit of Plague Monks here who were degenerating, so they're not coming back. These Skaven Slaves will probably come back. Here, the Storm Vermin with Halberds are fighting the Skink Chief, who is still healing from cold blood, but the downside is that makes his melee defense a whopping 5, which is just so bad. And the poison is helping by reducing these guys, the Storm Vermin's melee attack, but not quite enough. My Pterodons have run out of ammo at this point. One mistake I did make with them is that I did not conserve their ammo very well, so they're out already. But we do get a really nice banishment, which you can see is just shredding this Rat Ogre unit and, of course, all this infantry, because he had surrounded the Sword of Scar Veteran with so many of these troops. So I went ahead and dropped a banishment on top of them, and it broke this unit of Halberds and did quite a bit of damage to the Rat Ogre. So I'm having a very hard time killing. I did not bring nearly enough anti-large. At this point, my front line has completely buckled and is all broken. They are starting to come back in bits and pieces, Source Warriors, Skinks, and my Skink Chief has, my Stegodon here has rallied. And here's kind of the big turning point in this battle. So right now, I'm actually losing the balance of power, and quite fairly, I'd say. You know, I'm outnumbered, and most of his troops are elite troops. You know, it's not like I'm outnumbered by just Clan Rats. We've got 2 units of Storm Vermin with Halberds still on the field. We've got 2 units of Storm Vermin with sword and shield still on the field. On top of that, Tretch is basically at full health. And even the Plague Priest is at about a quarter of his health still. I am managing to chase off a few units, but he's got so many guys left on the field, especially these 2 half-health Rat Ogres, who are proving so durable. They're right now, of course, trying to get my Scar Veteran, who is rallying, but he's pretty fast, and just like when he was pursuing the Plague Priest on the Plague Furnace, they kind of have a hard time basically holding him down. But at this point, what I've managed to do is both of my Stegodons have rallied. And so what I'm doing is I've turned them back on shooting form because they barely used any ammunition, because I had moved up to shoot the artillery, and then Turin had unleashed his army against me as fast as he could. So I've barely gotten to shoot yet, so I have tons of ammo. So basically I've turned both of these guys around, and I'm putting all my shots into this Plague Priest on top of what my Chameleon Skinks have left. And what you're going to see is, like, this bolt is going to soar through the air and hit this Plague Monk for a whopping, like, little over 200 damage. So just a really solid hit from that. And these things are pretty scarily accurate because they only shoot a single shot, which is fair. Like, they don't have the fastest reload rate. So we'll go ahead and resume speed. And basically at this point, he's trying to get to my Slann who's full health. But the Slann is kind of slippery when there's plenty of Lizardmen still around, because he can easily float through friendly units. But you see, every time we're hitting this guy, we're pinging him for a solid... Oh, see, that one did like 500 damage. So every time we're landing on this Plague Priest with a giant bolt, it just does a big old fat dot. So here comes another shot, and I think... See, that one hit him. So both of those missed. And I think it's actually the regular skinks on here throwing javelins is what gets him in the end. Let's see. Let's see what actually gets him. So he's turning to fire another bolt. Yeah, see, he fires a bunch of regular shots, and oh, it miscast itself to death. So you see that? It looked like he overcast a Plague Wind, and that killed him. So at this point, I think he realizes that what the major threat is. He is trying to chase off my Scar Veteran here with these Rat Ogres, but they are, of course, really valuable, being fear causers and really strong combatants, so he kind of needs them in the main fight. He does try and get on top of me here, but between the 2 cold-bloodeds I put on my Stegodon earlier, he's healed a pretty good amount of health. I think if we look at his health here, if I can get it to stay on him, he's healed. Oh wait, no, that's the regular Stegodon. I wanted to look at the Skink Chief. Well, the Skink Chief is gone, but you can see that his healing cap is already pretty low. He is, of course, on death's row now with those guys chasing him. But now the problem is Tretch can't handle all this by himself. Between the Chameleon Skinks, the Slann Mage Priest, and the Stegodon, there's just so much Lizardmen left here. And all these Storm Vermin are starting to break just due to terror. And Tretch only gives a leadership buff when he's winning combat, and a lot of his other buffs when he's winning combat. And now that he's being pursued by all these units, he's being hit by poison javelins from the Stegodon. He's got Chameleon Skinks on him who do poison melee attacks. And the Slann actually was hitting him earlier. And the Slann does pretty considerable magic damage with 320 weapon strength. And he does have a melee attack of 24, which isn't that great against Tretch, but every shot that manages to slip through can hurt. Of course, the Skaven are starting to rally, as I wasn't able to stay on them super well. So we've got those Storm Vermin coming back in, and these Rat Ogres plow back in. But I managed to get off another Curse of the Midnight Wind, reducing their melee attack down to 1. And that is just a death sentence for them. They're not able to do any damage, so they're basically forced out by terror. And then this other unit comes in. But once again, there's so many guys left standing, and I've got a lot of leadership buffs from my Slann still being alive. And every time he drops that little explosion there, it does a nice little AoE magic damage that's just hurting people. And of course, the Stegodon got 1200 HP left, and it's just enough to keep him alive. Of course, I get that Shield of the Old Ones down for that +1 8 leadership. And I've also got the Aura of Quetzal, which is increasing the melee defense of all of my guys to basically 50s across the board. So these Skaven just aren't able to do anything. We get another fat comet there that managed to stagger most of this Slave and Storm Vermin line. And at this point, the Skaven just start to completely fall apart. I get a rear charge with the Pterodons that's finally too much for the Skaven slaves, so they break. The Storm Vermin have taken too much damage, so they break. And at long last, my Scarvet returns to the battle because the Rat Ogres had to have made a choice. They had to decide if they were going to stay away, and those 9 Rat Ogres weren't going to be in here to fight the Stegodon, which he needs them for the armor piercing. and also their high speed, or he could have kept chasing the Scarvet, who took a really weird path where he kind of went up and then he turned to the side and was running all the way over to there. And that's just a super long way away from everything. So he decided to come back, and when he did that, the Scarvet rallied and he had his cold-blooded still, so he popped it and managed to get back up to 1,000 health. And when he came in on the back of the Rat Ogres, that getting charged in the rear bonus, plus that really powerful armor-piercing anti-large, just did a ton of damage and broke these guys. And at this point, essentially the terror from this Stegodon with only 800 hit points left is just too much for the Skaven. And they have nothing left that has enough leadership and enough models to not just instantly terror rout when it hits the Stegodon. And that's just kind of the end for poor Tretch. And then of course we pop the Plaque of Dominion for that last 8 leadership, and that spells doom for the Skaven. So it was a super fun battle. That's actually the first time I've managed to beat Turin, who's of course going by the Hog Lord when he was playing today. But it was a good fight, and looking at the overall view, the Heaven Slon got a ton of kills. He dropped 3 Comets, 1 Overcast Curse of the Midnight Wind, 1 regular Curse of the Midnight Wind, 2 Banishments, and 4 Blood Statuettes of Spite. So he got a ton of value this game by just being able to survive and stay up the entire game. Because Turin, he didn't have any shooting in his army outside the Warp Lightning Cannons, which are pretty easy for Lizardmen to counter right now if they take the double Stegodon build. You know, it's I think some Poison Wind Globadiers might have actually helped a lot with giving him a way to do a bunch of damage to the Slon, or at the very least melt my dinosaurs and not get just pinned down by that shooting. He did a really good job of silencing my shooting as fast as he could, but even with him rushing as fast as he could towards my line, the amount of time it took me to get in range of his Warp Lightning Cannons, I was able to completely shatter one of them and bring the other one down to half health before Turin was able to do anything. Which just goes to show the power of these giant bow Stegodons when it comes to trading with enemy artillery. They won't trade well with all enemy artillery. If something's really well focused, like Dwarven Bolt Throwers or Cannons, typically the Stegodons won't be able to outtrade them because they don't quite have the range and the damage. But and they're a little more sturdy. Skaven War Machines fall apart super easily. The Scar Veteran, he did okay. Most of the damage he did was in health damage to the Plague Priest and the Rat Ogres, so he did a really good job at what he was supposed to do. He just didn't get a lot of kills. But honestly, what kind of saved me there near the end, which I don't know if I necessarily... what helped was not losing him saved me from army losses. Both him and the Skink Chief routed but managed to stay on the board due to the directions they chose when routing. And the Rat Ogres just couldn't catch him. They just didn't have enough speed and damage to catch him and put him down. And eventually Turin was forced to decide, do I keep this high value unit chasing the Scar Veteran and try and get him off the field, or do I bring them back to my army where they're desperately needed to try and kill that final Stegodon? And I think he honestly made the right decision to come back, because Tretch needed the aid, but unfortunately that just allowed him to rally. And if I had already spent my cold-blooded on like one of my Stegodons, this guy would not have been able to come back and been influential, but he had a cold-blooded left, so popping that and then that speed buff let him come back quick. The Skinks did okay. They mostly fought clan rats and slaves, so they did a good job, but if there's one thing I value Skinks for, is that they're like Skaven and Goblins in that they have a high rate of rallying, so they'll break, run, and then come back. The Swords did extremely well. They held out where they needed to, especially against the Storm Vermin with Sword and Shield, who are more of a tank unit, and they absolutely decimated the Slaves and Clan Rats, so they did a great job. The Chameleon Skinks did extremely well, with their shooting shattering one of the first Warp Lightning Cannon. They also harassed one of the Storm Vermin, and then they were instrumental in killing off the Plague Priest. The Cold One Spear Riders did and they actually got a chevron for their efforts. The Cold One Spear Riders did pretty well. They kind of got caught on the Plague Priest trying to catch him, and then when he ran through his own troops, they sort of got torn apart by Rat Ogres and Clan Rats and all that stuff. So they sort of got shredded. They did break, and if you saw, they kind of rallied and came back into the fight, but they definitely suffered quite a bit of damage. The Pterodon Riders, the Fire Leech Bolas, were easily one of the biggest heroes of the game. outside, of course, the Stegodon mashup, which we'll talk about in a second. But they got 53 kills, which is huge. And especially since most of their damage was done against heavily armored units, they performed extremely well. The Fire Leech Bolas completely ended up shattering alone the second Warp Lightning Cannon. And in addition, their Drop Rocks was pretty helpful in harming one of... I probably should have saved the Drop Rocks for later on in the game when all those units were blobbed up, but I was worried that my Stegodons alone wouldn't be enough to kill these guys. So in the future, I'd probably save that till later. And then the Stegodons, of course, did crazy good with both of them getting roughly 90 kills. Their Bolt Throwers easily eradicated the Warp Lightning Cannons in practically record time. And then once it came to combat, these guys can just slaughter loads of Skaven. Even if they have, you know, higher melee defense, armor piercing, and anti-large like the Storm Vermin, or if they're pretty sturdy like the Rat Ogres, the Stegodons just do a ton of damage. And they're able to keep pushing because their mass is super high, and they just do tons of damage while they're plowing through people. As for Turin's army, Tretch did his job. He survived until the end of the game. And he has a really high melee defense and a pretty decent anti-large bonus. So when he was able to get on stuff like the Cold One Spear Riders or the Skink Chief, you know, he was able to do damage. Or the Stegodons. The Slon, Tretch did try and jump on the Slon to kill him, but between the Slon's magical attacks and then the Lizardmen started rallying around him, and one of the Stegodons ended up plowing into Tretch. Tretch doesn't have very high armor, and he just took a ton of damage in a really short amount of time. But up until that point where he got isolated trying to assassinate the Slon, he was doing extremely well at his job, which is just to survive. The Plague Priest was probably the MVP in the Skaven lineup, in my opinion. He performed extremely well, and I poured a ton of resources into him with the Cold One Spear Riders, the Saurus Scarvet, and both of my Stegodons and the Chameleon Skinks. And it was very hard to kill him. What got him in the end was that my Stegodons were able to break away from the combat due to fleeing, and then they turned around and shot their giant bows at him, and they did about 2,000 damage really fast, and that's what got rid of him at the end. The Storm Vermin performed pretty well. The Clan Rats performed really well against the Skinks, was where they got most of their kills. Warp Lightning Cannons got completely shut down super early on. The Storm Vermin with Halberds were honestly probably the make-or-break unit in this game, just because I think they stayed back a little too long. When Turin saw that it was probably like Chameleon Skinks, Pterodons, the Fire Leech Bolas, and then long-range artillery that I was going to use to assassinate his Warp Lightning Cannons, at that point, it probably would have been better to just abandon the War Machines and like keep them firing, but just run the Storm Vermin ahead as fast as you can. Because once they got to the battle, the Stegodons completely fell apart. Both of them did. Like, they were absolutely massacring the Skaven line, though the Plague Priest managed to do quite a bit of damage to them when he could get on them, because he's got the mass to stick on them. But the Storm Vermin absolutely butchered the Stegodons and knocked them down to super low health. But by the time they got there, all the other Skaven units were so wounded because I had been dropping comets, and I had been just constantly badgering them with all sorts of Saurus and Skinks and stuff, that they weren't able to support the Storm Vermin. So the Storm Vermin got isolated, surrounded by just lots of little things, and by that point they just weren't able to survive leadership alone against those terror-causing targets. The Rat Ogres I thought did extremely well. They got plenty of kills considering how aggressive they were, and they managed to shut down my Stegodon shooting a little earlier, which prevented me from being able to turn my sights as easily on the actual enemy units. And the Skaven Slaves did pretty predictably. But it was a super fun game. I always love playing Turin. He's such a great guy. If y'all haven't already, you should definitely go check out his YouTube channel. I honestly believe he's probably the best Total War Warhammer player right now. There might be some people who are better because they take like broken lists, but I think Turin's one of the best players in the game, without a doubt. So being able to finally get a win against him was so nice, because he's beaten me every single time. Like, I think I've got like 12, or I think I've got like 8 or 9 losses against him and 1 win now. So thanks, Turin, for such a great game. Hope you all enjoyed this. More stuff coming out, you know, as it's done. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.